there's a couple of arguments Muslims have made for abolition of slavery. Now, one is, and I think this is not convincing at all, but one is to say that basically slavery was never really allowed. And the Quran, if you read the Quran this certain way that you can say it kind of ran slavery. I don't think that's a very good argument because one, I don't think you can really read the Quran to say that. And two, there's no doubt in Islamic law that this is allowed. So either you say that all of Islamic history is just a big mistake and we've misunderstood the Quran, or you just accept that the Quran did not condemn slavery as illegal or evil. The second argument is to say that, okay, the Quran doesn't prohibit slavery, but it narrows the ways in, encourages ways out. And so basically you're going to kind of have a natural reduction to zero. And what this argument, that's actually a pretty good argument because that's exactly what the Quran and the Sunnah do. They very much narrow the ways into becoming a slave. They very much encourage people to free their slaves. And what people who make this argument, like Rashid Rida, the famous Muslim scholar, died in 1935, say is that Muslims kind of lost the plot. They didn't fulfill this. They sort of didn't get this, and they just kept having slaves. Okay, it's possible. The third argument is definitely true. This is no doubt about this, which is to say that the Quran and the Sunnah value emancipation enormously, and that one of the aims of the Sharia is to free slaves. This is true. There's no debating this. There's no way, even the most skeptical historian, some guy who says that the Quran was written in 800 and all the hadiths are made up in 900 or something like that, they want to say this. Those things are still obsessed with emancipation. It just means that whoever wrote them was obsessed with it. Their Quran and the Sunnah are obsessed with emancipation, obsessed with it. So this argument says that, okay, so now that we have the capacity to just end slavery as an institution, we should do that because that's just fulfilling one of the aims of the Sharia. That's 100% correct. There's no doubt about that. And then someone could say, well, yeah, but you guys didn't come up with that idea on your own. You're only copying Europeans because Europeans are so great. My response would be, look, the only reason Europeans decide to abolish slavery is because the Industrial Revolution happened to occur in Britain and Northern America. Like if the Industrial Revolution had occurred in Baghdad or Cairo, they would have been the first people to abolish slavery. So it has nothing to do with somebody, like some civilization has some unique access to morality. It's just totally random. Okay, the third argument, and I think this is the kind of third and final one, would be to say that, okay, let me just add a few more points on that last argument I made, which is, how do you abolish slavery? You can abolish slavery because Muslim rulers or Muslim governments have the right to do what's called taqyid al-mubah, which means restricting the permissible. So, for example, if you're, you go to a Muslim country, like let's say, Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or something like that, you drive on the right side of the road or on the left side of the road or whatever the side. You can only go certain speed. You can't go above a certain speed. Now, God doesn't say thou shalt only drive on the right side of the road or on the left side of the road. This is a rule instituted by Muslim governments for the maslahah, for the common good of the Muslim community. So you're not required to have slaves. So the government can say, like, we're going to prohibit this because we feel it's an aim of the Sharia we're fulfilling, or we're going to prohibit it because this is another argument. If you can't do it right, you can't do it at all. So this was a major argument. This was the argument made by Ahmed Bey, the governor of Ottoman Tunis in 1846, when he abolished slavery in Tunisia, what became Tunisia. He said, there's Sharia requirements for having slaves, the way you treat them, and people are not treating them properly. If you can't do it correctly, we're going to prohibit it. Similarly, he said, a lot of these people you're bringing as slaves are Muslims. They were Muslims. They should never have been enslaved. Illegal to enslave them. And you're not distinguishing between Muslims and non-Muslims. The third thing that one of his relatives made this argument as well, or not one of his successors made this argument, was either you're enslaving Muslims or you're getting your slaves from areas that you have treaties with. You can't enslave people
from
a country that you have a treaty with. Right? So So it's basically you're not doing this legally, either in the source of the slave or in the way you treat them. So we're going to prohibit it. Okay. So those are the arguments for abolition. And the last two I get, this last one about it is an aim of the Sharia, and then it's within the right of Muslim governments to sign treaties saying they're not going to have slaves or not going to engage in a slave trade. This is totally allowed. Now, if a Muslim government said, I'm going to prohibit you from fasting, I'm going to prohibit you from praying, obviously they can't do that.
Yeah.
But this is restricting the permissible. It's not restricting the required. Right. They're restricting something that is permissible because it's meeting an aim of the Sharia.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No,
did I answer all the questions you have?
Well, no, it's just a final point. There is an ijma, as a technical term, meaning a consensus of scholars today, a legal consensus that slavery is not to be.
This is really interesting. Actually, this is interesting because this argument, as far as I know, was developed by an American Muslim scholar named Bernard Freeman, who's a professor, now emeritus professor of law at Seton Hall University.
Oh, I didn't know.
He's an African-American Muslim scholar. And he is, as far as I know, the first person to come up with this argument. And now it's widely acknowledged. You see it in like the different responses to ISIS and things like that. And so people say, well, what was wrong with ISIS if ISIS is just following the Sharia? The problem with ISIS is a couple of things. One, the people they're enslaving are dhimmis. So they're like Yazidis living in Iraq or Syria are dhimmis. You can't enslave people who are living or non-Muslims living under Muslim rule. And actually in the 1800s,
for centuries, they've been living peacefully.
Yeah, exactly. In the 1800s, during this one Ottoman rebellion in the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman troops enslaved some Yazidis. And when the governor found out about it, he was livid. He said, no, this is unacceptable. You can't, these are a protected minority. You can't enslave them. Mm-hmm. So one, that's what ISIS did. Second, that there's a consensus that slavery is prohibited. It's just not allowed anymore by treaty agreement, right? So, so that's an argument that Bernard Freeman came up with, and it's a pretty convincing argument for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much indeed. This is the book we'll be discussing, Slavery and Islam. It's available in paperback. Definitely worth reading. It's such a rich text that you've written, full of fascinating historical vignettes and details, arguments, observations, and so on. It is a very interesting read, regardless of the minutiae of the law. It's a fascinating socio-economic philosophical analysis. So I do commend you for that.